The champagne in my glass had gone warm. I stood in the shadows of the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. It was a room filled with people who measured their worth in billions. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto silk gowns and tuxedo shoulders. In the center of the room stood Elena Vance. She was the woman of the hour. She was America's sweetheart. She was the actress who had just won an Oscar and was now celebrating the launch of her debut memoir. The book was titled Unbroken Silence. It was already #1 on every bestseller list in the country. Elena held the hardcover book against her chest, like it was a holy relic. She flashed that famous smile for the cameras. It was the smile that had launched a dozen blockbuster movies. A reporter from Vanity Fair shoved a microphone toward her face. He asked her how she found the emotional strength to write such a raw and honest masterpiece. Elena laughed. It was a practiced sound. It sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze. She told him that the words just flowed out of her soul. She said she stayed up late at night, bleeding onto the page because she had to tell her truth. She said she wrote every single word herself in a fever dream of inspiration. I gripped the stem of my wine glass so hard I thought the crystal would snap. I felt the blood drain from my face. My name is Clara Reed. I am 28 years old. I am a ghostwriter. And I knew for a fact that Elena Vance had not written a single word of that book. I knew this because I was the one who had written it. I was the one who had spent 6 months living in her guest house in the Hollywood Hills. I was the one who had turned her incoherent, drunken ramblings into poetry. I was the one who had organized her messy life into a hero's journey. I had done it all for a promised fee of $100,000 and a small credit in the acknowledgments section. But this morning I had checked my bank account. The balance was 0. I had checked my email. There was a message from her high-powered lawyer. It was a cease and desist letter. It said my services were no longer required. It said the contract was void due to a breach of quality. It said if I ever spoke to anyone about working for Elena, I would be sued for $5 million. I looked at the display table near the entrance. There was a stack of the books. I opened the cover to the acknowledgments page. I scanned the text. My name was not there. She had erased me. She had stolen my work. She had stolen the money I needed for my mother's heart surgery. Across the room, Elena locked eyes with me. She stopped smiling for a fraction of a second. She winked. It was a cold and predatory wink. She thought she had won. She thought I was just a broke writer with no power and no voice. She thought she could crush me like she had crushed so many others. But Elena had made a fatal mistake. She had never actually read the book I wrote for her. Not really. She had only skimmed it for the parts about herself. She did not know what I had hidden inside the pages. She did not know that while I was writing her lies, I was also weaving a trap. She was holding her own death warrant in her manicured hands. And tonight, in front of the entire world, I was going to trigger the execution. 6 months ago, my life was falling apart. I was living in a shoebox apartment in Brooklyn that smelled like boiled cabbage and despair. My mother was in a hospital in Chicago. Her heart was failing. The doctors said she needed a complex surgery that insurance would not cover. We needed money. We needed a lot of money. And we needed it fast. I was a freelance writer scraping by on blog posts and magazine articles. Then I got the call. It was from a senior editor at a major publishing house on Fifth Avenue. She told me she had a confidential project. She said a major A-list celebrity needed a ghostwriter for a memoir. She said the deadline was impossible. She said the celebrity was difficult. But she said the pay was life-changing. $100,000 upon completion. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. I flew to Los Angeles the next day. A black limousine picked me up at LAX and drove me into the hills of Bel Air. We arrived at an estate that looked like a palace. The gates were gold. The driveway was lined with imported palm trees. Elena Vance met me by the infinity pool. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than my college tuition. She did not offer me water. She did not ask me about my flight. She looked me up and down like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto her property. She handed me a stack of legal documents. She told me to sign the non-disclosure agreement immediately. It was thick. It was terrifying. It said I essentially owned nothing. It said my voice belonged to her. I signed it because I thought of my mother in that hospital bed. The next 6 months were a nightmare. I lived in the guest house, which was bigger than my entire apartment building in New York. But I was a prisoner. Elena would wake me up at 3 in the morning. She would bang on my door and demand that I come to the main house to record her thoughts. Her thoughts were usually fueled by expensive red wine and prescription pills. She would rant about her ex-husbands. She would scream about directors who didn't understand her genius. She treated me like a servant. She made me pick up her dry cleaning. She made me scrub wine stains off her white Persian rugs. She called me names. She called me invisible. She told me I was lucky to be in her presence. But I kept my mouth shut. I turned on my voice recorder and I listened. I took her rambling, hateful words and I polished them. I turned them into a story about a struggling artist overcoming adversity. I created a character that the world would love. But the real Elena was a monster. One night in November, the dynamic changed. It was storming outside. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her library. Elena was deeper in the bottle than usual. She had finished 2 bottles of vintage Bordeaux. She was pacing around the room in her bare feet. She started talking about the past. She started talking about the year 2015. That was the year her career almost ended before it began. She started mumbling about a dark road in Malibu. She mumbled about driving too fast. She mumbled about a man on a bicycle. She mumbled about the sound of the impact. It was a sickening thud, she said. She giggled. It was a hollow, dark sound. She said she was lucky. Her fixer handled it. She said nobody looks for a drifter. She said she just kept driving because she had an audition the next morning. I froze in my chair. My pen hovered over my notebook. I remembered the news from 2015. A young man named Marcus Hale had been found dead in a ditch off the Pacific Coast Highway. He was a college student on a cross-country bike trip. It was a hit-and-run case. The police never found the driver. The case went cold. Elena passed out on the sofa a minute later. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I realized I was working for a killer. I knew I could not go to the police with just the mumblings of a drunk actress. She would deny it. Her lawyers would destroy me. They would say I was a disgruntled employee trying to blackmail her. I needed proof. Or I needed a confession. I looked at her sleeping form. I looked at the manuscript I was writing. And then the idea struck me. I would make her confess. I would make her confess to the entire world. And I would make her think it was her own idea. I finished the manuscript in January. I worked 18 hours a day for the final 3 weeks. I was exhausted. My hands cramped from typing. But I was driven by a cold, burning rage. I sent the final draft to the publisher. Elena read the summary. She loved it. She told me I was a genius. She hugged me, which felt like being hugged by a snake. She said the check was in the mail. She said I should go back to New York and wait for the book launch. I flew back to Brooklyn. I waited. 2 weeks passed. No money arrived. My mother's hospital called me. They said the surgery could not be delayed any longer. They needed the deposit. I emailed Elena. She did not reply. I called her manager. He told me to stop harassing his client. Then came the letter. The letter from her legal team. They accused me of trying to extort her. They threatened to sue me for defamation if I claimed I wrote the book. They said they had witnesses who would testify that Elena wrote every word herself. I was terrified. I was broke. My landlord gave me an eviction notice. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment and I cried. I cried until I had no tears left. Then I saw the news. Elena was on the cover of People magazine. The headline read, "The Soul of a Poet." She was going on a national book tour. The first stop was a live reading at the New York Public Library. It was a prestigious event. It would be broadcast live on national television. It was the perfect stage. I wiped my face. The fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold determination. I checked my bank account one last time. I had just enough credit left on my card to buy a ticket to the event. It was a VIP ticket. It cost $500. It was the last money I had in the world. I put on my only nice dress. It was a black dress I had worn to funerals. It felt appropriate. I walked to the library with my head held high. I knew the secret of the book. I knew the structure I had built. The book had 30 chapters. Elena had never really read the book closely. She only cared about the cover photo. She did not notice the pattern. She did not notice the code. I entered the auditorium. It was packed with fans and literary critics. The air buzzed with anticipation. I took my seat in the 3rd row. I was close enough to see the sweat on her forehead. The lights went down. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. Elena walked out to thunderous applause. She sat in a velvet armchair. She opened the book. She looked like an angel. She began to read chapter 1. Her voice was smooth and practiced. The audience was mesmerized. I waited. I waited for the Q&A session. I waited for my moment. My palms were sweating. I knew that once I stood up, there was no going back. I was about to declare war on one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. The reading ended. The applause was deafening. Elena beamed. She took a sip of water. The moderator opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up all over the room. I stood up. I did not raise my hand. I just stood up. The security guards started to move toward me, but I spoke before they could reach me. My voice was loud and clear. I asked Elena if she would do something special for her true fans. Elena squinted into the darkness. The spotlight blinded her slightly. She recognized me. I saw her eyes widen. I saw the flash of panic. But she was an actress. She recovered instantly. She put on her fake smile. She asked what I wanted. She called me a dear fan. I told her that her chapter titles were so poetic. I told the audience that the author had hidden a secret message in the table of contents. A message of profound truth. The audience murmured with excitement. They loved hidden messages. They loved Easter eggs. They thought it was a game. Someone in the front row opened their copy of the book. Elena laughed nervously. She said that was silly. She tried to change the subject. She tried to signal security to remove me. But the crowd began to chant. They wanted the secret. Read it. Read it. Read it. Elena had no choice. She looked down at the table of contents. She looked confused. I shouted out the instructions. Read the first letter of the first word of every chapter title. Just the first letter. A woman in the front row shouted out the first letter of chapter 1. The chapter title was In the Beginning. The letter was I. A man shouted the first letter of chapter 2. The chapter title was Keep Moving Forward. The letter was K. Elena froze. She looked at the list. I saw the blood drain from her face under the heavy stage makeup. She tried to close the book, but it was too late. The audience was playing the game. They were shouting out the letters in rhythm. I. K. I. L. L. A. D. The room got colder. The chanting slowed down as the words formed. M. A. R. C. U. S. H. A. L. A. The silence that followed was heavy. It hung in the air like smoke. The full sentence from the 30 chapters was, I killed Marcus Hale. Elena stood up. She knocked over her water glass. It shattered on the stage floor. The sound was like a gunshot. She screamed that it was a lie. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She screamed that I had rigged the book. She screamed that I was the one who wrote it. The entire room gasped. She had just admitted she did not write the book. She had just admitted she hired me. And in doing so, she validated the confession I had planted. I looked at her calmly. I spoke into the silence. I told her that if she wrote the book, then she wrote the confession. I told her she could not have it both ways. The cameras were zooming in on her face. Her mask was slipping. The panic was raw and real. She looked like a cornered animal. The live stream comments were exploding. People online were already searching for the name Marcus Hale. They found the cold case file from 2015. They found the location. They found the timing matched the timeline in the book perfectly. Sirens wailed outside the library on Fifth Avenue. The sound grew louder and louder. 2 detectives in plain clothes walked down the center aisle. They were not there for the book reading. I had sent an anonymous tip to the New York Police Department Cold Case Unit 3 days ago. I told them to watch the broadcast. I told them to look at the specific details in Chapter 12. In Chapter 12, I had described the exact location of the damaged bicycle. I described a detail that had never been released to the public. I described a sticker on the bicycle fender. It was a sticker of a yellow smiley face with a bullet hole in the forehead. Elena had mentioned that sticker in her drunken stupor. She said it flashed in her headlights before she hit him. The police had kept that detail secret to weed out false confessions. Only the killer would know about the sticker. And now it was printed in a best-selling book under Elena's name. The detective stepped onto the stage. They flashed their badges. They asked Elena to come with them for questioning regarding the death of Marcus Hale. Elena tried to run. She tripped over her long gown. It was pathetic. It was tragic. She screamed at her agent. She screamed at her lawyer. Do something. Fix this. I am Elena Vance. But nobody moved to help her. They were all backing away. The flashbulbs that had worshipped her an hour ago were now documenting her downfall. They handcuffed her wrists behind her back. The metal clicked. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. As they led her past me, she stopped. Her eyes were wild. She hissed that she would destroy me. She said I was nothing. I looked her in the eye. I told her she had already destroyed herself when she decided to erase me. I told her that ghosts always come back to haunt the living. I watched them shove her into the back of a police car. The crowd outside was jeering. The spell was broken. The idol had fallen. The fallout was swift and brutal. Elena Vance was denied bail. Her DNA was matched to a sample found on the victim's clothing that had been preserved for years. She had tried to clean the car, but she could not clean the past. The trial lasted 3 weeks. It was the trial of the century. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison for vehicular manslaughter and obstruction of justice. Her assets were frozen and seized to pay damages to the Hale family. But the story did not end there for me. Sales of Unbroken Silence skyrocketed. It became the most famous book in the world. But the publisher had a problem. The author was a convicted felon and a fraud. They came to me. They begged me to help them save the project. They sat in my tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and they apologized. I told them I would only help on one condition. They had to reprint the book. They had to put my name on the cover. Not as a ghostwriter, but as the author. They agreed. They also wrote me a check for the full royalties. It was not $100,000. It was $2 million. I paid off my mother's hospital bills instantly. She had the surgery. She recovered. I moved her into a beautiful house in the countryside with a garden full of roses. I bought my own apartment in Manhattan, with a view of Central Park. 6 months later, I sat at my new mahogany desk. I held the new copy of the book. The cover said, "Written by Clara Reed." I opened it to the acknowledgments page. It was blank except for one line. I had dedicated the book to Marcus Hale. I learned a valuable lesson that year. You can steal someone's money. You can steal someone's time. But you should never steal words from a writer, because we have the power to rewrite your ending. And I had written the perfect tragedy for Elena Vance. I closed the book and smiled. My phone rang. It was a new client. A famous politician wanted a memoir. I picked up the phone. I told him my rates had just gone up, because now everyone knew exactly what I was capable of. I was no longer a ghost. I was the writer who brought down a star, and I was just getting started.